The horrifying story of San Francisco's infamous Trailside killer. David Joseph Carpenter, also known as the Trailside Killer, spent the years from 1979 to 1981 preying on hikers and nature walkers in and around Northern California's outdoor spaces. The Santa Cruz Mountains and Marin County beauty spots like Point Reyes National Seashore, a vast expanse of protected coastline in Northern California, were Carpenter's favorite hunting grounds for victims. Carpenter killed 10 people and possibly several more, with 2 survivors from his attacks, Stephen Herdle and Lois Rinna. Criminologists have described Carpenter as having a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character, sometimes the amenable, bumbling, stuttering Mr. Nice Guy. The next an evil, sadistic hunter of women in the wilderness, ready to impart unspeakable violence. Marin County Sheriff Al Hohenstein described him as someone who enjoyed putting the victims at some point in a position of pleading for their lives. Early life of David Carpenter. David Carpenter was born in San Francisco on May 6, 1930. He was physically abused as a child by his alcoholic father, Elwood, and domineering mother, Frances. Between the ages of 3 and 11 years, David had a severe stutter, a persistent bedwetting problem, and enjoyed being cruel to animals. Carpenter was forced to take ballet and violin lessons as a child and had a propensity to dress in garish clothes. This, together with the stutter, meant he was a target for bullying at school. At age 14, Carpenter was sentenced to California's Napa State Hospital for undisclosed sex offenses. 3 years later, he was sentenced to the California Youth Authority after he was caught molesting his cousins who were 3 and 8 years old. Following his release, Carpenter lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. In 1955, the 25-year-old man married 19-year-old Ellen Heedle. The couple had 3 children together: Michael David, Gabrielle Louise, and Circe Ann. Despite having 3 children, the couple's marriage was far from normal. Ellen later told authorities that her husband was a sex addict who demanded intercourse at least 3 times a night. David Carpenter's first attack was in July 1960 on Lois DeAndrade, now known as Lois Rinna. He knew Lois from work, and since he had just had a new baby, he asked her whether she wanted to come and see the new family arrival. Lois was also acquainted with Carpenter's wife, and she felt comfortable going with him. He picked up Lois at a bus stop as agreed, but then he started driving down a deserted road. He then attacked her, tried to rape her, and then tried to kill her. She was stabbed in the hand and hit in the head with a hammer a number of times. Luckily, a military policeman, Wayne Hicks, had seen them drive down the road, and he knew no one was supposed to be down there, and he followed them. Hicks tried to stop the assault. Carpenter shot at him, and Hicks returned fire, hitting him in the stomach and leg. Lois said, "I thought that was it. He's straddling me." He had a hammer in one hand and a knife in another. For the assault on DeAndrade, Carpenter was sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison. However, he only served about 7 years. In 1970, he returned to prison after being charged with kidnapping. He was released again in 1977 after serving another 7 years. On August 19, 1979, Etta Kane spent the afternoon hiking the trails of Mount Tamalpais, which overlooks San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. When Etta failed to return home after her hike, her husband called the police and reported her missing. The police mobilized several officers and K-9 units, and the first search for Etta turned up with no clues as to Etta's whereabouts. The second search began the next day at dawn, and Etta's naked body was discovered in a kneeling position. Her killer had stood behind her and shot her once in the head, execution style. Investigators also discovered that the killer had rummaged through her purse and stolen her credit cards and a pair of sunglasses. However, she had not been sexually assaulted. On October 21, 1979, Mary Frances Bennett's long, agonized screams could be heard by nearby golfers. Unfortunately, they ignored them. She was mutilated and stabbed 25 times after she was attacked whilst jogging, then buried in a shallow grave under a layer of dirt and branches. She was found, still warm, by a group of hikers following a blood trail near the Palace of the Legion of Honor at Land's End. One police officer said she had been butchered. She was only 23 when she was murdered. Mary grew up in Deer Lodge, Montana, and had recently moved to San Francisco after graduating from an accounting school in Montana. She was an intern at a post-street accounting firm. Carpenter was always suspected, but police were never able to bring a case against him for the crime in the 1980s following his arrest. Barbara Schwartz, 23, was out hiking with her dog in March 1980 when Carpenter leapt out from behind a tree and attacked her. A female eyewitness who was out jogging that day saw the man attack Barbara from behind with a knife. By the time the eyewitness came back with police officers, she was dead and the killer was nowhere to be seen. Thanks to the eyewitness, homicide detectives now had a general description of the killer. The jogger described him as slim and somewhere around age 25. Neither of these proved to be accurate. Police also found a pair of bifocal glasses at the crime scene. Days later, a couple of boys also found the murder weapon, a 25-centimeter boning knife that proved to have Schwartz's blood all over it. The glasses turned out to be prison-issued specs, thus suggesting that the killer was a former or escaped inmate. Carpenter attacked his next victim on October 15, 1980. Ann Alderson, 26, had been walking in the woods in Mount Tamalpais State Park. At some point during her hike, she ran into Carpenter, who killed her with 3 bullets fired with a handgun. Ann's body was not found until the next year by a passing walker. Like Etta Kane, Alderson had been shot in the back of the head and was found in a kneeling position. However, unlike Etta, Ann had been raped by her killer. Richard Stowers, 19, and Cynthia Moreland, 18, planned to get married. However, the couple went missing in mid-October 1980 after setting off for a hiking trip at Point Reyes National Seashore Park. Their bodies were discovered during the search for Diane O'Connell and Shauna May in November 1980. At the time of their deaths, Stowers was stationed with the U.S. Coast Guard at the Two Rock Coast Guard training base. Moreland was a recent graduate of Rancho Cordate High School, where she had been a popular cheerleader. Shell casings found at the scene were a match with those from the Alderson crime scene. As it turned out, the gun used in all 3 murders was a .38 caliber pistol that had been purchased in October 1980. The buyer, Molly Purnell, bought the firearm at a gun store in San Leandro, California. Purnell then gave the gun to Carpenter, who could not legally purchase firearms because of his criminal record. Purnell would later state that she gave the gun to Carpenter as payment for her debt to Carpenter, who had provided Purnell with several items for her flea market. On November 28, 1980, Carpenter raped and murdered 22-year-old Diane O'Connell, as well as 25-year-old Shauna May. Both women had decided to hike in the Point Reyes National Seashore Park on the Sky Trail. Diane was in a group of 3 hikers and she was second in the group coming down the trail. The first of the group arrived at the bottom, but Diane was nowhere to be seen. At between 3:10 p.m. and 3:20 p.m. hikers in the park heard several gunshots. Rangers, volunteers, and police combed the park. On closer inspection, he found 2 bodies, which turned out to be Richard Stowers and Cynthia Moreland. They had been left face down in the underbrush. Later that day, Diane O'Connell and Shauna May's bodies were also discovered, found side by side and face down, making it 4 bodies in one day. The killer had stuffed a pair of underpants into O'Connell's mouth and nose while leaving another pair of bloodstained panties on her arm. A forensic examination proved that Diane had been strangled with a narrow piece of wire or cord while still alive. She and Shauna had both been shot in the head. May's corpse showed ligature marks on her wrists. She, like May, had been brutally raped before her death. The most troubling part about this double murder was the fact that neither woman knew the other. Therefore, detectives concluded that one woman had come upon Carpenter murdering the other woman by chance, thus sealing her fate. David Carpenter got a new job in February 1981. After working for a chain distributor following his release from prison, he took a job with Econo Quick Print, a small printing shop in Hayward, California. Carpenter struck in the Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park on March 29, 1981, when he came upon 20-year-old Ellen Hansen and her friend, 20-year-old Stephen Herdle. The pair was having a walk across the Santa Cruz Mountains. They were on spring break from UC Davis and had just gone past the observation tower. Carpenter told them both that he wanted to rape Ellen, and after sexually assaulting her, Carpenter shot them both. Hansen died, while Herdle managed to survive despite being shot in the neck. Herdle later provided police with a clear description of Hansen's killer, and he would also later pick out Carpenter in a police lineup. Heather Skaggs, 20, went missing on May 1, 1981. Her decomposing body would later be found in Big Basin State Park. More than any of his other victims, Carpenter had a direct link to Heather. A college undergraduate, she had worked at Econo Quick Print to make some extra money, and Carpenter was one of her co-workers. Gossip around the office was that the older Carpenter was a creep who wanted to date the much younger Skaggs. Apparently, Heather did not take notice of this office gossip. Her boyfriend Dan Piggle told police Heather had asked Carpenter to give her a ride to Santa Cruz so that she could purchase a car from one of his friends. Carpenter had made it very attractive for her to go and see the car by offering to check the vehicle, loan her money, etc. Fortunately, she had left details of Carpenter with her boyfriend, as he was a little concerned. That would be the last time that anyone saw Heather Skaggs alive. On May 24, 1981, Hikers in Big Basin State Park discovered her nude and decomposing corpse, and an autopsy proved that she had died from a point-blank shot to the face. Besides the fact that Carpenter was the last person seen with Skaggs before her death, investigators proved that the same .38 caliber handgun had killed both Skaggs and Hansen. This gun was traced back to Carpenter. Later it emerged that Carpenter went to dinner and the ballet the evening that he murdered Heather, seemingly oblivious to the murder earlier in the day. On June 16, 1981, the body of Anne Menjivar, 17, was found at Castle Rock State Park. Her body was too decomposed to determine a cause of death. Carpenter was never charged, but he was also the chief suspect in the disappearance and death. She disappeared on December 28, 1980. Her family and friends ruled out the idea that the aspiring college student simply ran away, and this was confirmed when hikers in Castle Rock State Park found Menjivar's skeletal remains. Prior to her death, Carpenter was known to frequent the Continental Savings and Loan where Menjivar worked as a part-time teller. Eventually, after the awkward and charmless Carpenter was seen chatting with Menjivar, one of the bank's customers warned management about him. This occurred just days before her disappearance. Carol Laughlin, 19, worked in the Curry Village gift shop in Yosemite National Park. In September 1979, she mysteriously vanished, and her remains were found at the base of a tunnel near Cookie Cliff some months later. The body was discovered by two men descending casting a wall near Big Oak Flat Road on April 28, 1980. Carpenter worked for a company at the time supplying items for the gift shop that Carol worked in. Though Carpenter's involvement in the murder has never been proven, David Carpenter was charged with 5 counts of murder, rape, and attempted rape on July 31, 1981. Due to all the publicity that the murders received in Santa Cruz County, Carpenter's trial was moved to Los Angeles County. He was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Richard Stowers, Cynthia Moreland, Shauna May, Diane O'Connell, and Ann Alderson. Carpenter also was found guilty of raping 2 of the women and attempting to rape a third. He was sentenced to death in the gas chamber on November 16, 1984. Following his conviction for the Marin County murders, Carpenter was tried and subsequently convicted by a Santa Cruz jury for the murders of 2 other women, Ellen Hansen and Heather Skaggs. The same jury also found Carpenter guilty of the attempted murder of Hansen's hiking companion Stephen Herdle, the attempted rape of Hansen, and the rape of Skaggs. Carpenter was also the prime suspect beyond the 5 murders with which he was charged. 2 of those convictions would later be overturned due to juror misconduct. Although he was never convicted, the evidence against Carpenter in the murders of Etta Kane and Barbara Schwartz is very strong. In December 2009, San Francisco police re-examined evidence from the October 21, 1979 murder of Mary Frances Bennett, who was jogging at Land's End when she was attacked and stabbed to death. A DNA sample obtained from the evidence was matched to Carpenter through State Department of Justice files. In February 2010, police confirmed the match with a recently obtained sample from Carpenter.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to stay tuned for more true stories.